All right, thank you, Tom. And sorry for the delay, a few technical problems with the invites, but I hope we got everybody the correct way to get on. We're still waiting for Susan, though, aren't we?
Yeah, it's a couple of them. I don't know what the situation is.
Well, why don't we go ahead and call the meeting to order? We can do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then hopefully they can join for the presentation. So let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So welcome. We have several guests tonight from both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed, and we always welcome your participation in these calls. Our primary purpose tonight is to hear the presentation of the Board of Education 2021-22 budget. We also have a presentation or interaction with our pension consultant from Milliman. And so those two things are an important part of our budgeting process. So without further ado, we'll turn it over to Matt and or your team, however you wish to kick this off.
Great. Thanks, Rob. I have a brief stack, about 10 slides or so, and then have the team here, obviously, where we can answer any questions on the operating side. And then we have a few slides that represent the year one capital planning projects that both Neil and Jason Casey will present this evening. So I will go ahead and get started with this presentation. The reason why it's interesting, I have this slide up with the guiding principles. This is actually the document that framed out our reopening plan for the schools as we were trying to start to pull things back together during a very interesting time in August. And you can see the four guiding principles there. And as we made our way through the year and into the budgeting process, we feel they serve very well to guide our decision making and kind of provide a coherent sense of planning for us as we work through our budget process as well. So certainly the health and safety of our students, instruction always at the core of what we do, knowing that there were social emotional needs to address for both our students and our staff, and then access and equity in both programming and technology have stayed at the forefront for us and serve to help us make decisions moving forward. So there are the numbers. This budget approved, it's the superintendent's budget, approved by the Board of Ed at what was about a 2.2. And as I sent an email to my Board of Education, we'll talk about the insurance favorability in a few, but I'm going to present to you a budget increase of 1.85% over operating expense from last year. It's an increase of about 1.3 million over our spending in the operating budget last year. So this slide represents a bit of the balancing act that we're juggling this year. And the reason I put that up is because our thought coming through, if we can effectively find a way to balance the challenges of COVID in the current year, it will help us plan more strategically and be more effective moving forward with our operating planning for next year. So we've had significant COVID-related expenditures. I know Amy's reported out on those as we worked our way through the year. We've done the same with our Board of Education. But with some of the mandates put forward on distance learning, we've had to add certified and non-certified staff, increases in technology, and we host a whole online school for our elementary students that have increased cost as well. So, as you worked your way through the budget materials, I'm sure that you saw we have a projected deficit of about $900,000 on the operating side. So the question becomes, how do we address that and then plan to move forward without creating large cliffs? So we have received some CARES Act money, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. We were fortunate to have savings from the last year's budget due to the pandemic that we rolled into non-lapsing. And we also instituted a freeze at this point in time, starting in February, on non-essential accounts to really tighten the belt, see where we are coming out of March. But we feel like we're in pretty good shape to cover using those levers our current year expenditures, which kind of helps set us up pretty well for next year. A little bit on enrollment. I know that you get these background materials, so I'll keep this piece brief, but we're projected to increase about 60 students overall from our October 1 enrollment this year. A little bit misleading because our enrollment dropped a bit this year in the primary grades. So we had budgeted for coming into this year an enrollment number very similar to that 4,020 number. So we'll be able to address our needs at the classroom level with flat staffing from where we are currently budgeted this year moving into next year. But as you can see, we update these enrollment projections on an annual basis, and we're going to start to see that increase at the elementary level in enrollment, an average of about 40 students over the next 5 years. That bullet about enrollment in grades K and 1 will be important. We'll really have to take a quick look at that because those are the students that in high numbers chose to either kind of pull out and wait in kindergarten and intentional year due to the pandemic or do distance learning. So we're going to have to see how those enrollment numbers, we just opened registration in kindergarten recently, pan out, and we're going to have to keep a flexible mindset with our primary staffing and potentially move sections around due to where enrollment are. But I think from a staffing and enrollment standpoint, we're in a solid position. You go to the next one, Abe. Thank you. So every year when we build a budget, we talk about, what are the conditions we're faced with? What is the feedback we've gotten in building a budget that really moves forward our strategic priorities and that concept of continuous improvement. So this process started way back in November, I believe it was, when we got together at the 3-board meeting. The Board of Finance provided some guidance to us. We talked about factors like the mill rate pressure, what's the impact of the pandemic on the local and state economy. That bullet on state budget uncertainty, it's remained in my budget presentation for years and years. It's a fluid situation. In the short term right now, in this year, in terms of how we plan with our educational cost share funding, that does go to the town. It appears it'll be stable. So that's good news. But this budget, we feel good about the budget we present to you tonight in terms of moving forward our strategic plans and those guiding beliefs. We're excited about the fact that we've moved forward with a substantial position on the shared service side, and that's the shared finance director. This budget still protects our personalized learning opportunities, particularly at the high school. It will adhere to our class size guidelines. And in a minute, I'll really talk about the primary goal of this budget, which is to kind of reestablish our intervention and support systems next year as we move through the summer and into the fall. So really in the crux, the overall goal that we've talked to our board about and our administrators about is we need to be positioned well coming out of this pandemic to support our kids, support our staff in both the summer months and as we move into the fall. And we repurposed, as you can see on the slide, almost 17 positions in certified staff that had different roles, normally, roles working with teachers to support them in a coaching role, working with students in an intervention role, and they took on classroom positions this year so that we could offer distance learning, so that we could lower class size. So it was a significant shakeup in terms of the current models that we've had in place and that we've built over time with our Board of Education to support our students and our staff members. We also added 5 positions at the elementary level to reduce class size. Those positions are all kind of interim 1-year positions. They're not represented in the new budget. And what we need to do now is bring these people back into the fold because they're going to serve as the crux of our intervention services as we bring kids back. So it's kind of a budget neutral move, but from a programmatic sense and from an impact sense for our staff and our students, it's the most important thing that we've been talking about as we frame this budget. We wanted to make sure we don't reduce these positions, we don't redefine these positions next year, that we pull them back into the roles that they were in previously.
Matt, I'm wondering where you got those people from. Were they teachers before?
So if you look in the middle of the slide where it says math coaches, language arts consultants, intervention teachers, those were their roles previously. And we repurposed them to be classroom teachers. So we now want to pull them back into their prior roles.
Oh, so they were coaches and consultants, et cetera, and now they're teachers.
Right. So those roles are actually vacant this year, Art. So while
Okay.
we're meeting more of the needs of students in terms of class size, we don't have those tiered intervention supports in place that we're really going to need next year.
Got it. I got it. Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead. Ed. All right, so this is kind of the number section where I'll get into the drivers, and we've always talked about our operation. 80% of it is made up of salaries and benefits. These are the personnel drivers, so this is really a breakdown of the contractual increases. The top piece being the teacher's contract, certainly the largest group that we have, with an increase of 1.81% or 1.3 million over last year's budget. You can see the administrator's contract. There's a decrease of a little over $100,000. So with Burke Leclerc's retirement, the retirement of Aaron Murray, who was our assistant superintendent of teaching and learning, we've completely restructured our central office staff to kind of broaden roles. And when we bring Amy's position into that as a shared service, we're able to show a reduction in those line items for this year. The nurses are yet to be negotiated, which is why you don't see too much of an increase there. We have the custodial contract, and then we put in reserves a dollar figure for unnegotiated, which is unaffiliated in the nurses. So all told, our contractual increase over operating costs from last year is a little bit over 2%, about $1.5 million. So the health insurance was the kind of the exciting news of this budget development process, because when we reported out very early on in November to the boards, both my board and your board, about projected insurance increase costs, I think we had a 9% increase placeholder in. When I presented that to the board a few months later, we had it at 7%. And then as Amy and the town staff worked with Lockton on projections, we got very favorable news on the state of our reserves and our internal service fund. So that will allow us to really come in with a very slight increase. I mean, they're projecting no projected increase for health insurance. As Amy looked at the numbers of who is retiring and who is rolling out of our organization, and in new hires, we have about $200,000 that we've saved in that line item to address the fact that several employees coming out were not benefited, didn't take advantage of our benefits, with the assumption that new teachers coming in will. But this really allowed us to take what was a $700,000 increase projected early on and have a $200,000 increase. So it's a major player in our ability to get to that 1.8%. And I guess shows how important that conversation of a couple years ago of creating solvency in that fund was.
So Matt, this is Linda. I just have a quick question. So this improvement is really based on a projection of claims. This does not reflect you taking some of that 42% IBNR that we have and applying that towards premium, correct?
Amy, is it a combination of both, or is it projected?
No, we're not.
Yeah, I think
just,
it's projected.
Yeah, it's based on the budget for the health insurance fund. There's no use of reserves.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So other areas, as we worked our way through the process, I've talked about our budget process before, that it starts at the building and program level and works its way up to central office and to the board. So we are going to reduce 5 full-time equivalents in our non-certified positions. This is an area that over the past 3 years has grown certainly faster than our enrollment has grown. So we're going to take a look as we get retirements and we see turnover coming out of this school year, and are committed to reducing 5 positions to try to stabilize that FTE number a little more than it has been in recent years. We have 7 known staff retirements this year. So this is the differential between an outgoing high salary and the average of hiring somebody at mid-level. We take about $25,000 per retirement in projected savings. The administrative restructure, which I talked about a little bit before, we took a hard look at our instructional supplies. While it's not a huge decrease. We felt like we could do a little bit better there. And then the equipment budget is one it's a zero-based budget account where we come in with requests every year. We prioritize those requests. So it's a combination of two things: reprioritization and people actually asking for less in that line item. And we do plan to use a little bit of the federal money, which we're eligible for on the technology front, about $160,000 to reduce impact to the operating budget. That's one of the areas that we are able to, because of all the distance learning and replacement costs of technology, utilize some of the new CARES money, and it impacts the operating cost in a positive way. So to kind of summarize thematically where we are with staffing, we do have one new position that's in this operating budget. It's a position that our board has talked about for a couple years now. It's a Director of Equity and Access. It will fit under the umbrella of Sue Lemke, who's our newly named Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. So there are 4 director positions under Sue. This will kind of complete that array and will really support what's important work in our strategic plan, help us to define outcomes and action steps associated with equity and student achievement. And it really aligns with our strategic plan. So in addition to kind of managing and working closely with our open choice program, which is now 4% of our entire student population, I think this is a position that'll have pretty significant impact for us across different areas. Our central office restructuring, I've talked about that a little bit, but you can see some of the bullets there. Realize some savings in the transitions with both Burke and Aaron. Some strategic expansion of roles with both Neil Sullivan and Sue Lemke, and then again, the shared service position and Director of Finance. And the non-certified staffing, the reduction of 5, I talked a little bit about before, so I don't want to hit that again, but it is an area that has trended upward recently, and we're committed to taking a look at that as our certified staffing number is hold pretty steady with enrollment trends. We want to look at being a little more effective with the non-certified number as well. So at the end of the day, we want to be able to talk about how we're improving our programming and supporting our students as well. So while many of these bullets are budget neutral, they were an important part of our budget planning and talking about to ensure that we have things covered. So we're going to offer a myriad of intervention and support programs for our elementary, middle, and high school students this summer. Those will be covered by the CARES Act money, which is defined perfectly in what we're allowed to use that money for. Director of Equity and Inclusion, we feel that's a good improvement initiative. And the other piece is where you see the reinstitution of the intervention models, the math coaching staffing, and the language arts consulting staffing. That's that top goal of making sure we repurpose our staff back to the original roles so that we're fully staffed, we're fully able to assess the gaps in learning, the social emotional needs of our kids, and we're positioned well going into the fall. And we feel that this budget really does that for us. And that's the feedback we've received from our staff, from our parents, from our administrators, that there are going to be challenges coming out of this. I think we all know it, and we need to be at the ready to support our kids and our families very effectively. So this rolls it all up into kind of one page. So I won't go through each of the line items other than to say that the top part of the page are the additions that we've gone through. They're the contract values, the cost of insurance, the new position, rolled over operating last year. It's a 2.79% increase. And then we take off of that the certified staff retirements, the 5 FTE reduction that we're committed to, and the other significant line item decrease, which was really the equipment line item, to get to that 1.8% over operating costs. So as this was my 9th run through this, I figured out how to get it as down as much as I could, because I know that the time is more appreciated on questions and conversations. So I don't know, Rob, do we want to start there? Do you want us to roll into capital? We're flexible about doing
No, let's let our board have questions on the operating budget. I think that'd be appropriate.
Yep.
So I open that to anyone. Art, Linda, please.
I've got one if I could. That last slide, if you could, Matt. So the 2.79, that's the total addition to budget. What percentage over last year are some of those? For example, the top three. 1.81% that's 1.81% of the total, adding up to 2.79. What is the percent increase over the prior year?
Yeah.
That is the percent increase over the prior year.
Okay.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
But sorry, I'm thinking out loud. So, but if it's the percent increase over the prior year, you don't add I'm confused then. Why would you add those together? You would.
That's my point.
You would average them.
Each one is an increase or decrease off the previous year's budget.
Right, over the total.
Right, if you have a 2% increase in this and a 2% increase in that and a 2% increase in another thing, you don't have a 6% increase overall. You have a 2% increase
These are
overall.
weighted-
All
they're
three
weighted by-
component parts.
They're
That's what
weighted by the dollars that they're compared to.
Correct.
So
It's not a line item comparison, if that's what you're asking for. It's the percent over last year to get to the total 1.85 at the bottom.
Yeah, I guess that's my point. So take the first one, the teacher's contract. Did that rise 1.8% more than it did last year?
Yes.
yes.
So when we look at the discrete breakdown of what those contracts were in terms of GWI, it was like a 157 GWI and a 1.48 increment that leads to those dollars.
And for everybody's sake, the DWI or those numbers are, what are they?
I'm sorry, Rob. Yeah, general wage increase, and then the other is like
DWI is
increment.
GWI. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So Rob, would you explain that? I mean, I remember earlier we were talking about a 3% increase in salaries, and I see 1.81, and I'm just trying to unpack that so I understand it.
I think you're talking about the line item to line item. So that is not in here. This is total budget over the prior year. So your line item are those green pages in your budget book. That'll give you the percent from line item to line item.
That's exactly what I was getting at.
Okay.
That's the way they've always done. Any other questions for Matt or the team?
I have as always, a bunch of questions. But let me preface it by saying, Matt, that I really recognize how incredibly difficult this last year has been with COVID, and respect how well the educational resources we have, you and all of the teachers and everything, have pivoted to, provide the best possible services that you can under very, very difficult circumstances. And I'm impressed with, repurposing everybody to different roles and everyone's willingness to be flexible, and very much appreciated, because it was a tough year, and probably will be for the remainder of this year and hopefully not into next year. My first question was about student enrollment projections, because, and maybe I'm remembering a different horizon, but I thought Tectron had said that we were going to have 300 or more new students. And on the very second page of this, it talks about 207 new students. So I'm just wondering what the difference is there. Is it because of a different time horizon, or am I remembering something wrong?
Which couple of things are you looking at, Linda? I'm sorry, just reframe me.
Page 2 of the notebook. So it's the memorandum to the Board of Finance from Susan Salina.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, it comes up in a few different places. I think it says in a couple of other places, it talks about adding an expectation of 41 additional students each year for 5 years.
I don't know if they're different timeframes would be my
Yeah.
response to that. I think that's what it would be, Neil. Can you verify that? I think that's
Yeah,
what it is.
it's a different time horizon. And it's all of those projection numbers that you're looking at, just to be clear, they're from the demographer Malone and McBroom, not from Tecton. Tecton takes Malone and McBroom's work, and then does its own thing. But that 207 number, we have tended to give you the next 5 years. So it's an increase of 207. I don't know where the 300, I'd have to know where that reference came from.
Yeah, from when Tectron did their presentations. But it might have been a different horizon, but that's
Yeah.
okay. Then in the yellow pages that you get into the detail of explanations of things, changes, you talk about the property liability insurance going up 22%, and that's as a result of the addition to Henry James. And that sort of struck me as, I mean, insurance rates do sometimes just pop up way more than you want them to or expect them to, but for it to be pinned on just the Henry James edition struck me as concerning because it's not that huge an increase. It's certainly not a 22% increase in the footprint of all school property. So I'm just sort of wondering, do you have a better sense of what's the driver there? And is this going to be an issue with every construction project that we do, that we see massive increases in property insurance?
I know Amy had conversations with the insurance company on that.
I can speak to that a little bit. I'd have to follow up with Melissa on the specifics, but I was on the email that was the quote when Henry James edition was finished. That was the quote that was given to us for the additional premium. In addition to the Henry James, we also instituted some cybersecurity insurance, and that's adding to the cost as well.
So that is included in the 22% increase.
Right.
Okay. You're making Art happy with cybersecurity insurance, I'm sure.
Fact of, not cost of.
Just a question so Matt, you skinnied down your presentation, but in the same presentation that was in the notebook, there was a pie chart on the spend categories, and special ed was shown as only 4%.
Yeah.
But in the special ed tab, special ed is highlighted at 24%.
Yes. So that is without staffing associated with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's
When you put the staffing into special education, it's 20% of the entire operating budget.
okay. That's what I was guessing, but I wasn't sure. Let's see what else I have. I wanted to ask about, it's another page that you didn't go over, was the remaining unknowns page of your prior deck.
Okay.
So pension rate, I know we sort of all agreed you'd leave that out for the time being. Insurance premium, now you've addressed that in the latest budget. The use of the ESSER funding, can you talk a little bit about, because I still don't quite understand what exactly that was for, and if you were getting that, why we needed to also give you the non-lapsing. And maybe it has to do with, you mentioned a projected deficit of 900,000, which for the current year, presumably, right?
Correct.
And so is the ESSER funding available and the non-lapsing to cover that deficit? And that's all.
Some of those funds, yes, and it's using some of those funds for some intervention efforts as well. But the reason why we'll still need to utilize some of the non-lapsing is just because of the magnitude of the deficit, Linda. You know, the 900,000.
And that's all COVID related, the 900,000?
It is. Yeah, between Amy made me a nice little cheat sheet here, but between about $500,000, Linda, in overall COVID expenses, which are like technology equipment. You know, very interestingly enough, our whole elementary district was outfitted basically with tables from a collaborative approach, and we needed to buy desks. It was a pretty significant price tag to spread kids out. Cleaning, dividers, tents for outdoor instruction. And then we had staffing, so we had 5 teachers and 3 custodians.
So I understand there's some in the new, just recently passed stimulus plan, there will be a bunch of additional money for the town and for the education department, and you may not yet have digested all of what that will be used for, but hopefully that will offset most or maybe even all of that projected deficit from what I'm hearing. Do you have any insight on that?
I mean, I have some insight. I mean, we haven't seen the details of it. I think some of the dollars can be utilized for that. I think we need to be pretty strategic, because I'm still a little nervous, to be honest with you, that the mandate may come forward if all children aren't vaccinated, that we need to have some type of distance learning opportunity. I don't know that yet. And this funding would allow us to potentially address options of instruction without repurposing all our staff again. But those are the 2 areas I'm thinking about, Linda. Definitely more to come on that.
Yeah, so we'll just all have to sort of stay flexible and figure out when that becomes clearer. Is there the opportunity to repurpose the ESSER funding or the non-lapsing fund to maybe help the next year's budget a little in some other way?
Correct. Yep.
Like the pension stuff. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Linda, are you done?
Yes. Amazing, isn't it?
Brilliant.
That's because we haven't come to Capitol yet.
I had a question, Rob, when you're ready.
It's your turn.
Thank you. First of all, I want to echo Linda's congratulations to the entire school district for the incredible job you guys did. I've really heard no complaints, and that's utterly remarkable and very well done. And thank you for taking care of our children and our staff. And your budget, I thought, was excellent. So overall, I'm very impressed. We did ask, as you know, both boards to come in low because of the CPI, but also because we knew this pension was going to hit this year. And so we knew it was going to be a tough year. We planned for this being a tough year. But one of the questions I had, Linda, 2 questions I had only, and maybe this is more towards Maria and Amy. My book does not have a capital sheet for Latimer Lane. So I don't know if mine was just missing or where that is, or we can expect it. But one of the questions is, 1, can I get a copy of it? And 2, can you speak to operating costs of the proposed Latimer project that might have on the operating budget? Will there be efficiencies, net operating expenditures? Do we have that information yet?
I don't have those specifics yet, Lisa, with where we are in the planning phase of that.
Okay. And then the second thing is, I think Maria, I don't know if you're on, but I think you mentioned last night that CCM was presenting on the federal money, and I think Amy sent us an email saying it's about $2.5 million to Simsbury, $1 million for the Board of Ed, and $1.5 million for the town. And I was wondering if there's any updates you received from that presentation or any new information that's come in.
So I can start, and Maria was on the call as well. So it was a good call. I can't say that there was a lot of substance to the call. They gave potential uses for the funding on the town and the Board of Ed side. So the Board of Ed side is probably going to have to follow the same restrictions as ESSER, which is reasonable, and the distance learning, the technology, things like that will be covered. They also are allowing for revenue loss. So for the food services program, that would be great. On the town side, they did say that we could use it for, say, police and fire salaries, similar to the last ration of money that they presented. We can use it for the health district. We can use it for revenue losses on the town side, but then everything came with a disclaimer that the specifics have not been worked out, and we will send you the detail of how the money can be used going forward. So that money that's coming to the town is not just for fiscal year 22, it can be used through fiscal year 2024. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, anything else that they said that the money could be used for. Restaurants that are in distress, so economic overview, things of that nature. But again, the estimates are very preliminary. They're getting their census data and refining those estimates, and then they'll send out the finalized after they get their census data. And then they are meeting with the Treasury to discuss how they want to be able to utilize the funds, or how they want the towns to be able to utilize those funds. And they'll let us know what is approved and what is not approved.
And when you say they, who are those? Who is the they? Is that the state or
The federal.
federal? So you were meeting with federal on that?
Yeah, the federal call was this morning, yes.
Okay. And is there any opportunity to use some of that for capital or no?
Not that I heard.
Okay. And did they give any updates as to when we'll have more information on that or no?
They did not.
Okay. That's all,
Anything else, Lisa?
that's all I have.
Okay. Derek or Art?
Go ahead, Derek.
Thank you, Art. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so I just simply put from my end, Matt, really good job. B of A, really good job here. And I mean that when everybody is doing more with less, that's kind of the theme of the day, based on how you've had to pivot with your year-over-year business plan. It's pretty incredible. So I think that came through in the proposed budget. There's a lot of detail, adds and subtracts, but simply put, when I look at the impact of the negotiated teachers contracts, is basically the budget increase in terms of dollars. I know there was a lot of management here, and I really don't have any additional questions than what's been kind of identified already. I thought I heard you say, and I'm sorry if I didn't fully hear the answer, but you said you had to add desks to spread kids out, and that one just stuck in my head. So I was trying to.
I just had, I appreciate your sending me to the green pages. I think the equivalent then to the number I had asked about would be 2.37% salaries for certified teacher per pupil. Is that the equivalent? I'm just confused between that and the historical data Board of Education, those fold out pages at the back where the teacher wage settlement was 3.05%. Could you help me out between those two? I'm not sure exactly which is the figure. And I note that they're both down some, so.
Art, I'm sorry, when you say which is the figure, reframe that for me a little bit.
Well, okay, under the green sheets, under instruction,
Yes.
salaries, principals, and directors is 2.66%. Salaries, certified teachers, pupil support, 2.37%, which I take it is increase year over year for that category. And yet when I'm looking at the fold-out page, Board of Education historical data, it's the one in the middle, which has for 2020 to 21 a 3.05% teacher wage settlement figure. And I'm wondering what is proposed for the coming year. I'm just trying to get an apples to apples set of figures here, that's all.
So
I think, and I didn't put this together, but on the historical data, the teacher wage settlement is just for the teachers, but the certified line can include others besides the teachers. It can include the principals, it can include the administrators, anybody. It can include people that are outside the teacher contract. So depending on what their contracts are, it won't be apples to apples.
Okay, so
But in the green page, you're saying that, Amy, because it says salaries certified teaching. And there's a different line for salaries, principals and directors, and a different line for non-certified.
It could be that that's the wage increase in the contracts, but the actual number is lower because Matt says when there's retirements, you save about $25,000 per teacher. Could that be it,
Right.
Matt?
Lisa's got it. Lisa's got a very key part of this. When you
Yeah.
negotiate a contract, you're negotiating it 2 years ago. And the changes that happen due to retirements, due to people who may have been added or left the district. So the figure that Art is sort of what you're negotiating at the time, which includes the step increase plus a general wage increase negotiated 2 years ago. And then the figure that Amy produces is the real people rolling over in the organization. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
okay, so the negotiated figure is the 3.05%.
Yes.
Correct. With a
So with that, the interesting piece of that is there's obviously different people in different parts of the scale, right? So you have, close to 65% of your teachers at the top of the scale that won't be getting any step increase. They'll just be getting the general wage increase, whereas your younger teachers will be actually getting that 3.05.
Yeah. I would just add, I want to associate myself with the comments about the discipline and the attention to detail that's gone into this. I mean, one of the reasons people move to Simsbury, what we're known for is excellent schools. And I mean, you've clearly put some time into this budget. And one of the difficulties we have is all of that hard work and that discipline coming up against the fact that we got some buildings that are getting very old and a capital increase. And then you get all that coming up against mill rate increase, which we haven't gotten to yet. So I congratulate you on hard work. What we've got to see is how do we bring all that together so that we don't whack the taxpayers when it's all said and done. But that does not take away from the fact that I also, like my colleagues, commend you for the work that you did in putting the budget together.
Thank you, Art. And that leaves the hard part about putting this all together is for us, and that's why we get paid the big bucks to do this.
Yep.
So I'll just wrap up by saying the same thing. I was very pleased with the budget that you guys presented in from a very, very difficult time, especially with the efforts to repurpose people and to take the coaches and make them teachers and then put them back to be coaches. Those kinds of things showed great agility, and I think it was very thoughtful. And then the second very important thing we haven't talked that much about is the you mentioned it a couple times, Matt, but I want to give everyone a shout out for the sharing with the town, and big shout out to Amy, who took on 2 jobs when it became immediately necessary for her to do so, and done a really, really good job. And the other collaboration things that you've done in an effort to reduce those administrative expenses. So those are good. We do have challenges that we won't all get addressed today. They go beyond just the operating budget to the pensions and the capital, and so it's a complicated puzzle that we build one step at a time. It's why we focused at the board meeting at the beginning, trying to get everyone to as you create the operating budget, to just think about being as efficient as you can. And again, kudos for doing the best job you could to get to that.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add a question? I guess implied on that, I'm curious, how competitive are you, either Matt or Neil, how competitive are you with our salary structure for teachers? Do you lose teachers to other districts that can give them more attractive packages? Are you able to retain people? When you go looking for people, are you able to attract them over other school systems? In other words, what's the net effect of the package that you put together? Is Simsbury able to bring on and keep the caliber of teachers it wants, or is it losing out to other school districts, or what's the situation?
I mean, that's a great question. We're fortunate we have great stability within our teaching staff, Art. One area of our contract that we are challenged by is like that mid-level, when teachers hit year 5 or 6, potentially getting ready to have a family. Some of the local districts around us in that particular area of the salary grade are much more competitive than we are. And we've lost some people in that area, and we've worked through negotiations to try to collapse steps and do some things differently. So overall, I wouldn't say the out-migration is a huge issue, but we do have a kind of a sensitive spot within the contract that we're aware of, that we have lost some good people, if that makes sense.
Hey, Matt, it's Derek. Is it safe to say that it's a competitive advantage to have Simsbury on your resume as an educator? I mean, it does kind of timely make sense that around year 5 or 6, after you've had the experience, that you might be able to, dovetail that into, maybe a better economic situation for yourself, in the light of possibly having, growing your family. But more importantly, that Simsbury looks good on a resume, right?
I think that's fair to say, yeah.
Okay, let's move in and talk about the capital.
Great, thanks, Rob. So I'm gonna turn this over to Neil. We have graciously Jeff from Tecton has agreed to join us as well to help with questions if we do have them about the specific Latimer project. Neil has a small deck to work through here, and as I said, Jason Casey, we have bleacher project. We also have some security dollars. He can work through those pieces, and I know the Board of Selectmen meets tomorrow night to continue their important capital conversation as well. So, Neil, I kick it to you.
All right, so yeah, we're just going to work through 4 slides tonight. I apologize in advance to the members of the Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen who already heard this in our other presentations, but one of the reasons why I want the public to know that we can keep this brief is that we had really a fabulous set of tours for the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen at Latimer Lane to advance the conversation. A few weeks ago on one Thursday afternoon and then a couple of meetings on Saturday mornings, we were able to bring the members of the boards into the building to sort of see the need of the Board of Education's top priority. That I think that was a really important step in helping the boards kind of row in the same direction, if you will. So there are definitely challenges, but hopefully we had the chance to present what the need is. So to just show you the couple of slides that we selected to present here tonight. The first one, if you followed the work of the Facilities and Enrollment Task Force over last year, and I know that members of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance served on that group. This was a format that Tecton got us rather used to in looking at the possibilities around how do you figure out what the cost of potential capital projects would be. So what this template gets at, and I really just want folks to understand the structure of the template, is that you're basically working with a formula of approximate costs or projected costs. That formula involves a few factors. Number one, the projections that Malone and McBroom comes up with, and you look years out to say what year is going to be the one that creates the most stress around projected enrollment. And in this case, around Latimer Lane, you can see it's 2930 that kind of brings out the greatest population, but based on the projections we have. There's a formula around square footage per student. And then the boards will recall that our original capital proposal, which promoted moving a Latimer Lane project and an addition at Henry James sort of at the same time, became clear that that would be an impossible challenge given the structures of the debt ceiling that the Board of Finance's policies can accept. So the Board of Ed decoupled those projects. Upon doing that, with identifying Latimer Lane as the top priority, there was also a factor to say that you would have to at least temporarily include a sixth grade swing space, if you will, in the project. So all of that is to say, how do you get to the bottom line of what something like that might cost? And you can see in the green enclosures at the bottom that the total project cost would be just short of something like $37 million, but that based on state reimbursements, that the key figure for the town to pay attention to would be more like the 25.7 million at the bottom, which is what the cost of what the town would need to bond to accomplish that project. The next slide is really meant to say to the public almost, all right, if you spend that kind of money, recognizing that $25.7 million to the town is a significant outlay, what do you get for it? And you're looking at a building that at a minimum has really a 30-year useful life, probably, unlikely more than that, but that it's either looking at a completely new building, or the case that what we have looked at is a renovate as new project. And I'll talk more about that in a second. For that money, you will address the capacity issues. Certainly, Latimer Lane, in terms of the demographics, is our most stressed building right now. I mean, it is really, from a population standpoint, especially in the primary grades, the one that is feeling the population pinch most acutely. Modernizing educational space and meeting curriculum needs in a way that are buildings that are really, our current spaces, we're trying to retrofit things that were built in the 50s and 60s for the most part. So you're modernizing space, and in addressing what a renovate as new project is, it really is the ability to transform a building. Renovate as new is as it sounds. It's a transformation of the building to create a new educational environment that is flexible space and innovative learning spaces, and really being able to address a lot of other building issues that are hard to address in aging facilities. So, and then lastly, addressing existing conditions, not only educational spaces, but things like building and life safety issues, handicap accessibility issues, certainly even green energy issues that old buildings are hard to deal with. To put another layer to that is the next slide of what a renovate as new project would address, starting on the biggest scope, which is the site of the land that you're talking about, which is addressing accessibility issues, playground and play area issues. Probably most importantly at Latimer, if you've ever experienced drop-off or pickup time at Latimer Lane, serious improvements could be made with a reimagined traffic flow and parking flow that happens at that building, and other issues related to landscaping and septic systems. The exterior of the building in a renovate as new project, things like roofs and doors. Significantly, I know in our tours, we talked about the inefficiency and just the age of the original windows at Latimer Lane, which are certainly problematic, and then related to other improvements to the facade that you could make. On the interior of the building, what are you talking about? The core spaces. When we talk about core spaces, certainly Latimer Lanes are among the most aged in the district in terms of current presentation. The gym auditorium space is definitely one that is not up to Simsbury standards. The cafeteria is very much an old aging structure with an undersized kitchen. And the media center, despite being the second largest second largest school in the district, it's the smallest media center. Really just 2 classrooms that were converted into a media center at one point. So the core spaces are certainly one of the really important things that need to be addressed at Latimer Lane. We refer to specialized education spaces, a lot of things related to special education that have changed over the years in terms of OT, PT rooms. I know we showed you some of those situations where we're running things like that on the stage right now. A lot of offices that we have carved up out of existing classrooms, but certainly general classrooms as well, and what you can do to modernize general classrooms. I mean, they're still going to have the technology, 4 walls, but it is currently 22 classrooms at Latimer Lane that would is the occupancy right now, and we picture something right in that ballpark. And then lastly, I would refer to building systems. When you can start fresh, you think differently about things like security and what you can do with alarm systems and entry systems and vestibules and things like that. HVAC systems to bring air conditioning into buildings when you have not previously been able to accomplish that without piecemeal approaches, fire suppression. And I think we're very excited about things like, LED lighting, electrical, and to look at energy solutions, whether that be solar or other things that you can look at when you're going back at a building in a comprehensive way. So very excited about those possibilities that could bring great efficiency to the building over the long term. So lastly, just to get the conversation flowing here, this is the work that our Board of Education went through over the past few months as it forwarded capital needs to the Board of Selectmen to get to this point. As you know, we originally put steps 1 and 2 together. We thought these were the most important priorities in terms of addressing the long-term needs at our elementary schools. And one of the things that I think is really important to talk about this, while Latimer Lane may be at the front of the line, all of our elementary schools, which average 75 years of age, need some attention. So we think the 6th grade addition is still an important priority and an important outcome of the community conversations we hosted last year, and would really provide relief to all of the elementary schools. But when push came to shove, the top priority needed to be Latimer Lane School, both because of the demographics and the population challenges that it's facing, but also just the aging facility and quite frankly, the tiredness of that building that I'm sure was reflected in the tours that we brought you on. We still firmly believe in the importance of the 6th grade. In the Board of Education's capital plan that it forwarded to the Board of Selectmen, we put it out into year 4 of the plan. That was a conversation starter to say, how can this be looked at in terms of debt structure? So, and then in terms of priorities that we were aided by Tecton in their long-term study, the next greatest need in terms of buildings, and this would be outside the threshold of a 6-year capital plan, but just as an important way to communicate with the town, Squadron Line is the building that is probably in the greatest need of attention after Latimer Lane, and then it would be at Tooten Hills after that down the road. So again, we brought these first 2 steps together through our process. We decoupled them and really understand and want to be able to have the conversation with the boards about understanding your debt policies and how do you fit them within the structures that you've established for carrying debt over the long term without making the operating budget and the overall mill rate be something that's unacceptable to the public. So again, it's a big project with a brief set of slides, but we didn't want to have a lengthy presentation tonight in order to allow for questions. And again, Jeff Wazinski from Tecton is also here, and we may pitch some of the questions to him as well.
So I think it'd probably be appropriate to talk about the Latimer Lane and the long-range plan before we jump into the bleachers and the other projects. And again, these have been long-going topics. I guess I'll kick this off by asking, and you answered my main question, Neil, which is, what's the long-range plan, the end game here? When we started talking about the 6th grade at Henry James, there was a conversation around, perhaps fewer actual number of schools, and that pretty quickly we got back off of that track. But I'm interested in the operating savings longer term that would come from renovating these buildings and repurposing the distribution of grades and students to a more efficient level. Meaning schools that have multiple cohorts of each grade. This has been a big thing for me for a long time. I know I've talked to Matt about it, but how do you feel about the 6th grade there and what we do with the space and the other schools, and is the plan to just renovate all 5 of the schools, elementary schools, long term?
I think that the 3 schools that we showed at the start there are, clearly the ones that are in the most immediate need. It may not be a renovate as new project as some of the others. I do think Terrafil eventually will need a significant addressing of, there's just, issues related to the age of the building and the second floor with utilities and things like that are going to require a significant capital outlay at some point. I think one of the things that, while the community last year did not express any appetite for closing a building, we certainly learned that the importance of dedicating space to preschool was a more important priority than perhaps we had realized. Right now, our entire preschool operates out of Squadron Line, and certainly what we heard from our parent community at the various neighborhood meetings was that there would be a strong desire to give people the option, now that preschool has become a much more universal approach for what we do with our pre-K students, that would be one of the uses of space that we had maybe not gone in with as strong an objective on prior to our study. But yeah, I would say that, I'll let Matt weigh in here too. The idea of, any kind of building closure was not well received, as you will recall from just about a year ago.
Rob, I would just add on that, because we have had this conversation a bunch, the ability to, at some point in the future, put the entire 6th grade together would gain you some level of efficiency. It wouldn't be enormous, right? It would probably be in the area of 3 to 5 full-time teaching positions. I compare it a little bit to like a Terrafil school comparative to Squadron Line, right? When you look at our class sizes, how that plays out at our smaller schools and at Squadron, where you have 5 and used to have 6 sections of each, right? You'd have them all at the top level, and it was just a different kind of staffing model. So you'd be able to reestablish some of that with the 6th grade model, but certainly not like some of the other models we had initially talked about and explored, a 5-6 school or different grade level configurations. You just won't be able to achieve that with the neighborhood school model.
Okay. Does anybody else have questions relative to the Latimer Lane and the other projects that Neil discussed?
I'd like to follow up on some of the stuff about pre-K and get a better understanding of that. So right now, is pre-K required, or this is just something we do in addition to what the state requires schools to do?
So pre-K is required. I'll put pre-K in three categories. Pre-K is required for identified special education students. As a
Okay.
school district, you are required to offer services and therefore schooling to students who get identified typically through a birth to 3
Sure.
process.
Yeah.
And then they matriculate into preschool. So that's category 1, absolutely required. We also, our philosophy related to our open choice students, which has been an important priority of the Board of Education, is to bring them in as early as possible. So we accept a dozen per year preschool students through the open choice program that are students who come from
Help them.
Hartford.
Sure.
There's money that we get reimbursed for those students, but those students do not pay a fee or a tuition. And then through the Department of Continuing Education, category 3 is parents who are paying on a tuition basis, more like a daycare, to bring their students to a preschool within the public school setting. So those are the 3 categories that make up preschool currently in a variety of percentages.
So I have a couple questions about the last category of pre-K there. So that they're sort of competing with educational play care and those kinds of
Precisely.
organizations. And I mean, I'm certainly aware that pre-K is an important educational leg up for kids. Does the tuition that the parents pay for that third category cover all of the costs of pre-K?
It does not
Yeah.
cover the special education teachers. They're in our operating budget, but it covers the teachers of the classroom. Yes.
But does it cover any capital costs? Just operating costs or any capital costs?
Does
I
not
would say
cover capital
operating
costs.
costs.
Okay. So here's my concern, and I have mixed feelings about it because I do understand the importance of pre-K, but at the same time, we're basically talking about building bigger capacity at Latimer to add more room when we know we're going to move 6th grade out, and then we're going to put pre-K there. And I guess that's in addition to pre-K at Squadron, right? That's not replacing pre-K at Squadron. That's in addition to?
No, I think you, by that time, Squadron will have some additional stresses for classroom space that you may need to be emptying out some of the preschool there in order to address your population increase at Squadron. So I would say it's more likely to be addressing the second most stressed building besides Latimer Lane from a demographic standpoint.
Okay, so the whole so you're not talking about expanding the pre-K program, just moving it.
Certainly not in the early years of this. I think over time it would depend whether more parents, given a neighborhood school setting, would send more of their kids to preschool but no, that's not certainly the initial plan.
Because that was my concern on a couple of fronts. One is, to go back to Rob's earlier concerns all along about wanting to consolidate schools so that we have greater efficiency and not need as many teachers, having more pre-K spread out. Mm-hmm. I know that parents like that better, but it actually ends up costing more. But secondly, I was also worried about, is this kind of a backdoor way of expanding a program? And in my vague recollection, and I don't really recall all the details, I know there was some grousing in the community when pre-K was sort of added in a little bit sub rosa because there was some extra money from the the choice program or something. And so there were some people who were unhappy that it wasn't really something that was voted on as a community thing of, hey, do we want this new program? It just sort of showed up. So I just want to be thought.
That was, yes, that was half-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Matt. I couldn't quite remember the details, but
Linda, we've had pre-K. We've had pre-K in Simsbury since I moved to town in 1998 because my daughter went.
All right. I just wanted to be
paid for
cautious not to, be not fully transparent with the public on what was going on there. No. But I just do have a little bit of concern. I mean, I totally understand the need to update Latimer, having been there and seen, single pane windows where the freezing temperatures were pouring off of the glass and the door frames you could see through them. And yeah, definitely need some upgrades there. I'm just a little concerned about the, building that extra capacity when we know we're going to move those sixth graders out.
So Linda, if I could just talk to that for a second.
Sure.
That's sort of why we wanted Henry James done together, because if we've done the sixth grade at the same time and moved them out, it would help ease the enrollment pressure. So by keeping it there and building the area for the sixth grade to remain in the building, we can then repurpose it to get the school solely moved out of Squadron, easing our pressure at Squadron. So moving the sixth grade will just ease the enrollment pressures we're going to feel at all the buildings anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place. I mean, ideally, from my perspective, I'd see you do the sixth grade first, but if you're feeling the pressure at Latimer the most, I understand why you want to do that. I also, when, Lisa asked that you provide a capital sheet, please be sure to include all the increases in operating costs for larger, when you expand a school, all of those additional, the 22% increase in insurance and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, it's something also that concerns me, that all of this construction is not only going to add to our debt service, but is going to add to your operating budget. And we need to be cognizant of the fact that that's going to be coming down the road. And my last question is about demographic projections, just because I'm reading in the popular press, which may not be the best source, but about studies showing that because of COVID, the birth rate is down significantly. And I'm just wondering, by the time we get this new capacity built and the kids who are not being born this year roll into pre-K and K and first grade, are we suddenly going to be saying, geez, I guess we didn't need this space after all? And Neil would understand that better than anyone else, probably.
Yeah.
So Neil, do you want to address that?
I mean, I can certainly ask Malone and McBroom to give me a little more information about current birth rates. Ours has been going up over the last few years, and they won't know what it was for this year until they actually collect that data from the Department of Public Health.
Yeah, they're probably looking at birth rates, and the study I was looking at pregnancy rates.
Oh, okay.
So it's 9 months quicker or 6 months.
What I can tell you based on the enrollments that we're receiving right now, even in the current school year, is that the Simsbury real estate market is hot. So,
yes, it is.
So we are definitely feeling incoming students that may offset any, but that's why each year, Linda, though you get ahead of those trends. We as part of the overall long-term study had a bigger cost to Malone and McBroom to do the study, but the annual update is sort of an annual cost that we bear through our operating budget, and it stays very much with the trends. That's why you do it on an annual basis, so that if those trends change, you're not falling behind them.
Right. Okay. So just one last little comment I'll make about the pre-K thing, and the reason I asked about how much the tuition covers is that we're basically, in the long run, building a new pre-K location, but the tuition isn't actually going to cover the cost of that capital outlay. That's becoming a taxpayer-funded thing. And I think it's important for taxpayers to understand that they're underwriting a new pre-K location to compete with private sector companies that already do provide pre-K, whether you like that or not. It's something I have heard complaints about from pre-K providers. So I just want to make note of that. I'm done.
Okay, let's try to keep moving here. Any other comments on the Latimer Lane project?
I have one, Rob.
Okay, Lisa.
Thank you for that presentation and for all the work you've done. We've had an opportunity to watch all the presentations over the past years, so this is not the only presentation. So thank you for that. I know you guys have put in a lot of time. Matt or Neil, could you speak to sort of how you came up with this number? What methodology did you use? And is the cost per square foot a medium cost, or is it a high cost in comparison to our towns, or a low cost? Where are we with this? I'm just trying to understand the methodology and how we got to this number, because I assume right now there aren't any plans, so it's a concept number. So if you could speak to that, that would be great.
This is exactly why we brought Jeff Wyszynski on the call.
So, hi, Lisa. Jeff from TechCon. So the numbers that were generated that Neil went over in great detail are really based on historical averages, and they're at the midpoint. So they're not the highest construction cost per square foot or the lowest. It's what we try to do is be right at the median. So what that means is that you're getting a good, durable building that's going to last from a structural perspective, 50 plus years, building systems 20 to 30 years, as Neil had outlined. So it's kind of right middle of the road as far as the total costs, both on construction for the building and the site.
Can I just follow up? So what a high cost, would that include like energy efficiencies? I know what kind of energy efficiencies are we going to be able to account? Is this solar? Is this geothermal? Any of that in this? Yep.
So with a state grant application in a school project such as this, you have to basically follow the Connecticut high performance guidelines, which is really very energy efficient building. It's not really set to a net zero type of energy use, but we've seen in most of our projects that we're putting out on the street nowadays that we're seeing an increased performance, and the actual construction cost to get closer to a net zero building has come down significantly. But what's not in the number you see tonight is, a full photovoltaic array on the roof, for instance. We've seen communities, rather than invest in the initial cost, capital cost for that, we've seen communities look at their entire portfolio of buildings and try to enter into like a power purchase agreement instead. It seems to be a little bit more efficient than outlaying the capital cost for like a photovoltaic array. There does need to be more study as far as geothermal. We look at it for basically every single project we do nowadays, but rest assured that included in that cost is a very highly efficient, energy efficient building from a building system standpoint.
Thank you. And then just a quick, just concept wise, so if we're at the midpoint, what more would we get if we were a little above the midpoint, and what would we lose if we were a little below the midpoint?
So it really would come down to kind of life cycle costing of like materials. For instance, if you were to go to kind of a notch above, increase the dollars per square foot another 10 or 20%, you would start looking at things like, I'll give you an example, like terrazzo floors or epoxy terrazzo floors that long term they're going to last forever. The maintenance is relatively simple. The replacement cost is next to zero. Whereas kind of the middle of the road, you're still ending up with a very good durable flooring system. You see BCT in your buildings these days. We're seeing a lot more of these rubber flooring, which are easily maintainable and last a good number of years. They just don't last 50 years like a terrazzo would. So that's kind of the difference on the high end. If you were to take a step down, I'll give you an example, and I'll point to like wall construction and wall types. When you start dropping down a notch in the construction costs, you're not able to harden the building where the building needs the durability the most. For instance, like in corridors or in bathroom cores, you'll often see them switch to a metal stud and drywall rather than a brick and block or a block wall construction. So when you start to drop down in the cost per square foot, you start to take away some of the durability of the building, not only from a finish standpoint, but from a building system standpoint as well. You start dropping down on some of the controllability of like your mechanical systems. So that's why we use the mid-range numbers to really, you're getting a very good, solid building that's going to last the appropriate amount of years, and it's going to be good to maintain as well. So that's why we try to hit the sweet spot, if you will, with the construction.
So just one last question, and I know Rob's going to think I'm crazy for asking it, but if you spend a little more, do you save a little more over the life of the time because you don't have to replace the floor? Is there a net savings analysis, like a spend to save analysis anywhere in here?
Yep. Oftentimes, life cycle cost analysis where you would analyze the day one cost from and I'll stay on the floor, the terrazzo versus the rubber versus the VCT. You would look at not only the length of its useful life, but also the annual maintenance costs, and you would compare it. So yes, we used to do a lot of schools for one particular city, and they had a pretty good reimbursement rate. So they invested the dollars in things like terrazzo, things like block walls, so that they knew that was their kind of one swing at it to reduce the overall maintenance costs and operating costs to the building. So yes, it can be looked at, absolutely.
And what kind of a swing is that on the operating costs over the life of the building? Is it big dollars or little dollars?
Well, when you're talking energy savings, it could be substantial. I mean, there was a slide in one of the presentations where we kind of showed baseline code building systems. We showed basically meeting the Connecticut high performance guidelines, then 30% improvement, and then a net zero. And with the fluctuation in energy costs, as I guess this last year, the exception because they dropped dramatically, they're going back up dramatically if you haven't noticed. There is an opportunity to save a fair amount on your energy consumption on a year-to-year basis. So it's probably tens of thousands, not thousands, approaching the hundreds of thousands in some buildings. So it's definitely worth analyzing for sure.
Okay. I don't know if that costs money to analyze, but I'd be interested in seeing that because that.
Sure. Yep.
Rob, sorry, Lisa, I don't mean to cut you off, but I know, and Rob, you got your eye on the clock, but I do have a couple comments.
Always.
Quickly.
Go ahead.
If there's one thing I learned by being on the facilities task force, that prioritization of these individual projects was tantamount. I think we start going down the rabbit hole of all these multiple projects, and it takes us down a different path. So I appreciate the focus on Latimer Lane. I would just also thank Neil and the team for pulling together those tours. That to me, if everybody in the town of Simsbury could see, what I saw walking through those halls, I would go so far as to say that Latimer Lane is functionally obsolete and actually quite embarrassing. I would say in terms of the overall budget, in terms of the numbers that you're seeing on the page, I wouldn't trust them. It's not that this won't cost millions of dollars, but when I look at a construction budget, for something that starts construction a year out from today, we're putting significant escalators in those numbers because we don't know what the overall costs are going to be. So never mind a 2, 3, or 4 year out budget. Costs are going to go up. So I would recommend maybe on a regular basis, whether it's semi-annually or annually even, and maybe a little more so closer to the project's start date, that we take a look at hard cost numbers, because as you know, Jeff, lumber is 4 times as much as it was 6 months ago. Concrete is going through the roof, and it's blowing budgets to the tune of 10, 15%. And those are just 2 line items. We're not talking here about labor cost savings probably all that much, but there are line items within the hard cost budget alone that are enough to blow the budget outside of any type of reimbursement that the state may give us. So I think we're going to be having a lot more conversations about cost, but I think it's imperative that we don't hang our hat on any one number that we're seeing here tonight. And that very likely that the budget would go up. And I know there are escalators and contingencies in this budget, but I think that we need to be regularly understanding the increases or unlikely decreases in the budget, such that we have a real-time pulse on what costs are and what it's going to cost the town.
Good advice.
Yep. Thank you, Derek. Okay, I think everybody's had a chance. Art, let's see if we can go through the stadium bleachers and press box and the other capital items for the Board of Ed.
Great. Jason, go ahead.
Sure. So starting off with the high school bleachers, these are bleachers that were originally built in the 1960s. They're not ADA compliant, and they were actually built prior to many safety codes, and they're not compliant to those codes either. If I get the next slide. Initially, last year, we asked for the replacement of these bleachers. We had asked $850,000 for this. The plan was to expand the seating to 1,400 seats. So we've reduced this to $600,000 with the plan to keep them closer to the 850. We may be able to move the needle a little bit on this to 900 seats or so, but essentially we're taking a look at the budget realities and keeping the number as low as we can. Next slide. So again, since the time that we requested this the previous year, 2 things have happened. The regular safety inspections took place. The recommendation was for them to be replaced. They don't comply with safety codes, although they're not, because of their age, they don't need to meet them to be open. They're also not ADA compliant, same kind of grandfathered in situation. Additionally, we had Malone and McBroom do some design work on this to flesh out these numbers. So the 600,000 is comprised of demolition and disposal, foundation work, site work, along with then a price to replace the bleachers and press box itself, and then some work that needs to be done in a storage facility that's located underneath the bleachers, which is leaking quite badly and exposed to the elements. And that makes up the cost. I don't have a slide for the final. I don't have a slide for the final capital projects. I don't know if you want to stop at the bleachers first and then move on to it, or
No, let's do all of them at once.
Okay. The second one's a bit easier. It's just the continuation of our security improvements. So we're looking at things like main entrance security, where we're improving our vestibules. We've done this at most of the schools at this point. We have a couple more to do. And additionally, things like blue light panic button systems for the school as well. That's for $250,000.
Is there a mandate for those blue light safety systems?
It's been recommended by our security consultants.
Okay.
How many schools does that 250 cover? Is it just one or is it multiple?
It's projects in multiple schools.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, any questions from our board relative to these projects?
Yes, as always. Can count on me, Rob. So I don't attend sports activities at the high school, so I just need a little background. How many games do people go to each year and sit on the bleachers? I mean, like, how many football games are there?
I'm going to go to our former high school principal here.
Yeah. So the answer is either like 5 or 6 games. And without being a smart aleck, the answer to how many people show up depends on how good you are. So a winning team will, bring maybe a few thousand people to the site, but many of those people are opting not to sit on the bleachers. They'll stand around the fence and, so we believe that just like the current size of an auditorium, you don't build it to fit the entire student body. I would say the bleachers are similar, that the 850 size for a major football game is appropriate. And it's more than adequate for other sports that are less likely to draw that kind of crowd.
So there's 5 or 6 football games and then some additional other sports that people sit on the bleachers to watch?
Oh, yeah. Soccer, lacrosse, field hockey, track meets. What else? Rugby. Yep.
Okay. So there's probably a few dozen dates when the bleachers are occupied. And are they unsafe now? You said that they're not compliant, but we're grandfathered in. So what's the pressure to replace them?
It's a worn out structure to begin with. There's been multiple repairs over the years, but the safety codes are significant. One of the big ones is gaps between the seating and the backing of the seating, which could potentially allow someone to fall through. So although we're not required by law to adhere to this because of the grandfathering in, it's still a concern.
So in a capital budget, the issue is always it's this versus what else. And, I'm looking at feedback from people around things like the golf course irrigation system, which is ancient and needs to be replaced or repaired or something, and has been pushed off, which is more important. So it's difficult to, we'd like to do all of these things, but there isn't always room for all of these things. And so I'm just trying to get a better sense of the urgency. And I don't know what a press box is. I mean, does ESPN come to our games? But what's a press box and what does that entail? Can you do the bleachers without a press box?
Linda, we should invite you down to the high school on a Friday night in the fall. You really should experience it because it's a wonderful community building event. And I think as far as the use of the bleachers, we do need to remember that it is not solely the high school sports teams that use it. It is a community resource for our youth sports programs as well.
Okay, so what is a press box?
So a press box, in addition to having game day workers, the people working the scoreboard, the referee keeping the clock, our SCTV announcers are up there, and it's also housing coaches. I assume you've watched some football, the coaches on the headsets who are up there.
I thought they were always walking around by the sidelines.
Nope, there's coaches on the headsets up there so that they can see the entire field, and they're communicating to the people on the sidelines and they're located up there as well.
So it's just an enclosure at the top of the bleachers. I'm sorry to be so stupid, but I don't go to these games.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm just going to say that Linda's absolutely right. All of these discussions, we could have these kind of discussions. Some people don't understand, libraries or other things that people want to do too. But we have to rely on, and this is serious, that the town collectively sets priorities for where we pick these important capital projects. And this has been sort of like a mantra from us about capital planning collaboratively between the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen for the town. And this project really is a community project. I think Susan said it right. This is a high school without bleachers or a football team is a big deal. But so is all of these other things. And I know there are advocates for the Performing Arts Center. There are advocates for the walking path and the bike path, all of these things. And so at some point, our budget making process has to rely on the respective boards to present to the town a list of projects that we think we can afford in a priority based on their utility to the town. And then the Board of Finance job is to say, how far down that list can we go? And we could ask hard questions about everything from the top of the list to the bottom of the list, and we should, and we do. But we're not going to single out the press box or the bleachers, other than to say, I presume that this is one of the Board of Ed's priority projects for this year that falls into that category. And so when we get the capital budget from the Board of Selectmen, and the capital fits in the guidelines and the policies that we have, which is a huge task, we'll be able to better figure out how all of this fits. Is that fair? Okay.
Yeah, well said.
All right.
Rob, just one quick thing. I think Amy, I must have missed, maybe my book didn't get complete, but I don't have any of the Board of Ed's detail sheets. Can I pick those up? Or?
Neither do I.
They haven't gone out yet.
No.
Oh, okay.
We'll get them probably tomorrow.
Okay.
This is part of the process that never gets, I won't say fixed. It's hard. We do operating budgets, and we do your operating capital, and then the capital has to be matched up with the operating capital of the town, and then we talk about capital collectively. And it's such a huge driver because we have big projects on both sides to do. All right. But we want to see those sheets and the prioritization. It's what we need to make these decisions. All right. I guess I'll go back to you, Matt, and Susan. One last. Is there anything else? I think you've received a lot of accolades tonight, and you deserve them for this budget. But is there anything else you'd like us to take away from the meeting? This is your chance.
I would just, thank you for the opportunity to present and for the questions. I know you're all thorough in how you look at this and the seriousness of it. I will say we've had ongoing conversations with Board of Selectmen about the prioritization, and I know they have an important meeting tomorrow, and I feel good about the feedback that we've given them as a Board of Education in terms of where we may see some flexibility in the out years that can help with the debt service lines. So certainly more to come on that in the next week or so with all the hard work everybody's engaged in now.
Hey, Rob, can I make a request of Amy and the Board of Selectmen members that, when you do your presentation to us on capital, I'd like to see what things didn't get funded as well as which things do get funded, because we're not always seeing, well, okay, the irrigation system isn't being funded, but we're hearing about it elsewhere. So I kind of want to understand, well, what choices were made to cut certain things in favor of other things. So we see what that prioritization looks like and what the rationale is for putting those things in priority or in your priority or order.
I think that's fair. All right. Let's move. Thank you very much for the presentation and participating.
Have a good evening.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Good. Now, we are going to talk, there goes Matt, but we are going to talk about the pensions here for Milliman. So to the extent, I usually make jokes about the entertainment value of our meetings, but in this case, we actually have,
Rob, excuse me, just point of order. I think Susan you were giving her last word and then she didn't.
I'm sorry.
And it's fine.
Thank you.
I was just going to thank y'all for the feedback and just, I just wanted to say, Linda, to your point about characterizing the preschool, that just didn't sit so well with me. We're not trying to sneak a preschool location in.
No, I know you're not. I'm just
that. Because I don't like the way that just kind of sat there. So we've worked really hard on our capital plan. We've done all our long range planning, and we've worked really well with the Board of Selectmen. And I look forward to that meeting tomorrow night. But I did want to just say that we worked really hard on our priorities and trying to make it really clear where we were.
I was just being sensitive to past history and making sure we don't have a similar situation.
Okay.
All right. My apologies to Susan. Thank you, Tara, for it's hard, 25 people on the screen. So I meant no disrespect. All right. Moving on. We have a presenter tonight from Milliman, and maybe Amy, you could introduce our guest tonight. I should know this person, but I apologize, I don't. So.
It's okay. This would be the first time. Typically, Becky comes and presents, but tonight we have Jen, and she will walk you through a presentation. She has share access, so she will put up her presentation and get you going.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here. So there's a lot of numbers I'm going to be going through today, this evening, but I want this first page of my presentation is mainly to just kind of set the table and give some context for all the numbers that will be presented down my road. The top of this page is a graphical representation of the pension plans, target asset allocation, and how they map out based on Milliman's capital market assumptions as of June 30th, 2020. The bigger the bubble, the bigger the allocation within the plan's targets. The further to the left or along the bottom, the lower the risk of any given asset allocation, and further up is the higher their expected return. Okay, this black dot right here in the middle represents the entire portfolio. Based on our capital market assumptions as of June 30th, 2020, the expected return, long-term return, is about 6.1%, and that's not taking into account any additional return for active management. With a small return, the small active management added in, the target interest rate assumption is 6.25%. Okay. Now that's just to give you some background for the framework for that. Based on a analysis of almost 170 audited financial reports for various towns throughout the state of Connecticut as of June 30th, 2019, so last year's audited reports, about half of the communities are currently at an interest rate assumption of between 6.75% and 7.24%. Another 25% of the population is roughly at between 6.25% and 6.74%. And the average rate for the state is hovering around 6.75%. Again, this is as of June 30th, 2019. I imagine those numbers have gone down slightly since then, but probably not too much. Okay, and we come up with our numbers by looking at a very long-term horizon here. As you know, pension obligations are very long-term in nature, so we tend to go out to the 75-year horizon, and we look at the median, 50th percentile, the median return, and that's where we get to that 6.11% number. So that's just a baseline framework. This next 6 pages of the presentation is going to, the next 3 pages first attacks the pension plans, and then the following 3 pages looks at the OPEB. It's broken down into the government employees, the police employees, and then the Board of Education. So on the government pension plan, there's 8 columns here. I'll walk you through each column, and then this is repeated for each plan as I go along. And feel free, anyone, to interrupt as I go through the presentation if you have any questions. The first column is and I want to preface that all these numbers are currently estimates. We're still working through the July 1st, 2020 actual valuation. So these are all estimates based on our July 1st, 2019 valuation and with projected liability. So it doesn't reflect the updated census information just yet. So keep that in mind. Our first column is the projected number from our valuation last year, both on the liability side and on the asset side, okay? Just to give you a baseline of what we expected to happen, where we expected the number to be this point last year. The second column reflects actual investment performance over the 2019-20 fiscal year, okay? The pension plans returned just north of 3% for fiscal year 2020, which is about average for all of my clients. You got to keep in mind, going back to a year ago, we're in last March, when the markets just kind of fell off a cliff. If since rebound, they were able to rebound a little bit before the end of the fiscal year, but you didn't have much time to make up all those losses. But 3% was pretty good relative to what happened last year. So with that return, it was below the assumed return of 6.75%. So there was some investment losses. But as you know, we smooth those investment losses over any investment losses or gains over a 5-year period. So that loss is not fully reflected this year. It'll be spread out over the next 5 years. But as you can see, when you look to the bottom line, the contribution requirement reflecting the actual asset performance increased the contribution by about $14,000 over our projected estimate. The next column is talking about the first assumption change I'd like to talk to you about tonight, and that is the adoption of the Pub 2010 mortality table. And the Pub 2010 mortality table is a newer mortality table. It was issued about 1.5 years ago, and it's the first of its kind. It's specific to public pension and OPEB plans. Up until now, the mortality tables issued by the Society of Actuaries have ignored public plan mortality experience. But they decided to embark on this study, and it was quite revealing. It actually showed that the mortality experience of public plan employees is very different than that of the corporate world. The tables are, in some cases, yes. The tables are broken down into several different varieties. There is a table specific to teachers, and that study does show that teachers live for a long time. There's a table specific to public safety employees, such as your police and your fire. And there's a general table for kind of covering all others. So we have looked at that table and are strongly encouraging the adoption of that table this year. We encouraged it last year as well, and the town decided to defer that. But we are strongly encouraging the adoption of that this year because it has become standard practice across the municipal world. Our estimate on the impact of the adoption of that mortality table for the government employees is that it'll increase the liability and the normal cost by about roughly 6%. And that equates to an increase in the contribution of roughly $250,000 to the 1.59 million right here. Okay. That's all other things being equal. The next thing we would like to look at is the amortization period that is currently being used for paying off the unfunded accrued liability. And that's these next three columns. The plan is currently just under $12 million underfunded. So there's a shortfall of $12 million. And as of July 1st, 2020, the amortization period has declined down to 13 years, which is getting to be quite short. And so we're suggesting looking at potentially lengthening the amortization period.
Jen, can I
yes.
interrupt? Just a quick question. So it's 13 years because we're at a 25-year closed amortization period and we're at year 13 of that. Is my memory right on that?
Yeah, we're down to year 13. Yep.
And so are you suggesting extending it to a new closed amortization period? Are you thinking open amortization or a layered amortization?
We're suggesting extending it to a new closed amortization period. And I presented three scenarios here. We could look at those or anything in between. I've suggested extending it a couple years to 15 years, to 17 years, and to 20 years. And again, that would again be a closed. So for example, if you extend to 15 years this year, next year would be 14, the year after 13, and so on and so forth.
And can you just quickly, because this is some complicated stuff, but if you think of it like a mortgage, just go over the difference between an open, closed, and layered amortization.
Sure. So if you're thinking of this as a mortgage, an open amortization is basically every year you're going to refinance your mortgage over a new 30-year or 20-year period. So you're really never paying down the unfunded amount. You're just always deferring it again and again. That's the open amortization. A closed amortization is like your standard mortgage where you say, I'm going to take out the loan for 30 years and I'm going to pay it off for the next 30 years. And after 30 years, it'll be paid off. Layered amortization, I kind of look at that as if you take out a loan, an original mortgage for say 30 years, and then maybe 10 years from now, you decide I'm going to add an addition onto my home, and I'm going to take out another loan to fund that, and maybe that'll be for another 20 years or whatever, what the case may be. So and then maybe a couple of years later, you say I'm going to add a patio out back or a pool or what have you. And so you take out another loan to fund that. It just kind of builds and builds and builds. And so those are the differences between the three types of amortization methods. You're currently employing a closed amortization method. I will add that for purposes of counting standards, an open amortization method is not sound and it's just not sound actuarial principle. But both closed amortization methods and layered amortization methods are designed to fully fund the plan over a period of time, whatever that may be. Okay.
Thank you. That was helpful.
So we've looked at 15, 17, and 20 years here, and you can see each one will reduce the contribution more than the other. So there's a trade-off there. You know, if you extend the amortization period from 13 years to say 17 years, it just means it's going to take you 4 years longer to get to 100%. The mechanism is designed to fully fund the pension plan over that period, and get to 100% funded. So it's just prolonging that, but it does take some pressure off the budget as a result. So we've presented those three options. And again, these are all these scenarios I've talked about thus far assume that you don't change your interest rate assumption, which is currently at 6.75%.
What does that do to if we were to change both the mortality and the interest rate assumption, what does that do to our funding rate or percentage?
So if you go over to these last two columns right here, you'll see that, so at the 6.75% with the new mortality, we're at roughly 69%. To drop it down 12 and a half basis points to 6.625 lowers your funded ratio by about 1%. And then again, by about another percent if you drop down to 6.5. So it deteriorates it slightly, but it's not a huge impact, at least not on this plan. But it does, the costs do increase significantly over as a result. So if you were to go all the way to the right, not change your amortization and go down to 6.5%, you're looking at a contribution of 1.7 million. For reference, the contribution for the current fiscal year ending 2021 is just under 1.3 million. So, almost about a $400,000 increase year over year.
And Jen, when you say government employees, is that general government and police, or just
the general government?
So it doesn't.
The next page will address the police.
Okay.
And so I just want to also just understand, as you said, it's like a mortgage. So yes, we could actually do the right things and deal with the pub 210 and lower the interest rate assumption and absorb that by lengthening the amortization period. But I want us to also understand that like having a 30-year versus a 20-year mortgage means that in the long run, you're paying a whole lot more.
That is correct.
Right? Yeah.
So when it comes to pensions, the basic premise is you pay now or you pay more later,
right,
as with any loan, so to speak.
Yeah. It might be good to actually look at what at some future date, if you can actually show us, well, what's the additional cost to you to add that longer period? In the end, how much more are you going to pay?
Sure. Yeah. We could easily calculate a net present value of
that.
Okay. So I've extended the rate down to 6.5. Just remember the previous page, I did say the target rate is 6.25. I'm not saying or suggesting that needs to be done all in one full sweep. A methodical approach over the course of the next several years would be prudent and would be reasonable. And it's the approach that many communities in the state of Connecticut are taking. So, I'm not, and, as your actuary, I'd be happy if you went to Pub 2010 and maybe lengthen the amortization period a bit, if that would be helpful. And we can defer the interest rate for next year. I'd be okay with that. I'd be comfortable issuing reports on that basis. But I want to present all the numbers and all the financial consequences just so you get the full picture.
Jen, just to clarify, I thought you said, is 6.5 your recommendation or 6.25?
6.25 is where we're at. So the expected return based on the plan's target allocation, without any additional margin for what we call alpha, for active management of the funds, is 6.1. And I would bump that up to a 6.25 just to take into account some active management.
No, but I mean, so you're recommending we get to 6.25 in a couple of years? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a big change. Okay.
Which is a change from what you've heard in the past, and because it is a moving target. Every year we take a look at the portfolio, and we apply our most recent capital market assumptions, which change. Interest rates are very low right now. Things have happened in the markets in the recent year. So it is a moving target. We've seen that target go up at times, and we've seen it come back down. So it's not a fixed target, unfortunately, and it has been trending downwards.
And what do you mean by active management? And do we do that in our pension?
There's a few funds you have that aren't just like a passive index fund, whereas if you invest in, say, the S&P 500, the return is the return. There's no strategic allocations going on there. So we allowed for a small margin for that. You could be conservative and truly use the 6.1 as your target. That is an option. But again, this is a moving target. And next year I could come back and say the target is not 6.1 anymore. It's now 6.2 or what have you. So, that's where we're at currently. Okay, moving on to the next page. This is the police pension plan. I've presented all the same scenarios here as well. And the impact is relatively the same. The police pension plan is slightly better funded, so the lengthening of the amortization period doesn't have as much of an impact because you're looking at a smaller unfunded liability, and a smaller percentage of the liability that is unfunded. So, but again, for reference, the actually determined contribution for the current fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021 is just about 810,000. So we start at 876 with just our baseline projection. With the Pub 2010 mortality table, that does grow to about 972,000. That can be mitigated by some changes, some lengthening of the amortization period. Again, but if you bump up to these lower or reduce the interest rate even more, you're looking at contributions just north of 1 million. And again, I haven't shown the numbers of these interest rates with lengthened amortization periods, but the order of magnitude would be relatively the same as you see at the 6.75% scenario. And you'll notice here for the police, we're only assuming a 3% increase in the accrued liability. It's because the Pub 2010 study did not show as much mortality improvement for public safety employees as it did for the general population, which is not unexpected based on the nature of the work that is done by those employees. And then moving on to the Board of Education plan. Again, similar scenario. The Pub 2010 table, we're estimating a 6.5% increase here, mainly because the Board of Education demographics are predominantly female, and females tend to have a bigger increase in mortality improvements over the males in this study. So there was a slight impacts the liability a little bit heavier as a result. But again, for reference, the contribution for the current fiscal year is about 1.3 million. Our baseline projection was roughly the same. With Pub 2010, you're looking at just south of 1.6 million. And again, if you were to go all the way to 6.5%, just south of $1.7 million. So those are the three pension plans. The next 3 pages looks at the OPEB plans, the other post-employment benefits. This is first for the government, general government employees. We've broken out the police on the next page and the Board of Ed on the following page. Now, one thing to note here, there's one less scenario being shown here because the OPEB plans are currently at a 15-year amortization period, whereas the pension plans are at 13. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. So I've only shown for additional scenarios of lengthening the amortization period, I've shown 17 years and 20 years, in addition to the 15 that you're currently at. On the town side, the actually determined contribution can be seen right here. For reference, the current budget is just north of 125,000. We projected that out to 132. Reflecting actual investment performance bumps up to 150. With Pub 2010, you're looking at about 200,000. And if you were to go all the way to 6.5%, about 240,000. A police OPEB plan, again, for reference, last year, or the current year, you're at a $360,000 actuarially determined contribution. Bumping out to Pub 2010 gives you to 450. All the way up to 6.5% gets you to 480. And then the Board of Education number is the largest number, mainly because of the teacher population. And again, the frame of reference, the current budget is 800,000 for current fiscal year, with the updated mortality, roughly 942,000. And then all the way up to 6.5%, $1 million, just under $1 million. So there's a lot of numbers that are on these pages, a lot to digest. But the basic theme is, you really want to make strides in at least changing the mortality assumption this year, and give consideration to interest rate assumption change either this year or in the next couple of years. And you do have this option of lengthening your amortization period to kind of mitigate the impact of that to an extent, if that is something you desire. Given that these plans, the pension plans are all either still partially open to new hires or have closed just in fairly recent years, extending the amortization period out a bit is not unreasonable. In a perfect world, your pension plans would be 100% funded by the time your last active employee retires, and then you just live off the fund for the rest of those retirees' lifetimes. So to extend the amortization period a bit would not be unreasonable, and it is something to consider either this year or even in future years potentially. If you decide not to do that this year.
So one of the things, just a question for you, we're going to have a substantial debt spike on our debt service in a couple of years if we go forward with the capital plan that's been presented. So rather than have a double spike of capital and pension, as we work with the Board of Selectmen to try and figure out when the debt spike is and to try and take care of the pensions in advance. And my question to you is, that's a pretty big drop from 675 to 625. And what is that, just current market conditions? Because I know you look over a 30-year period. I mean, how can you just talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, it takes into account current market conditions, but it also takes into account expert forward thinking as to what future market conditions are expected to be. And let me go back to that page, and we look at various percentiles and various time horizons. We're looking at the 75-year time horizon. If you look at 5 years, there's quite a range of possibilities, right? But over time, we expect that to converge and kind of approach this 50th percentile, this black number right here. So we're looking very, very long term, and we're not just looking at current market conditions. We're looking at basing it off of our current market assumptions, which reflects not only the past but also what the expectation of the future. So it takes into account, and this is based on our Milliman's financial experts, their thinking.
Jen, can you send us all of, or perhaps Amy send us all of these pages, because we don't have.
Yeah, I think the same thing. We need to do a little. We appreciate very much, Jen, and it is very transparent the way you did it. I'd like to play around with different scenarios, combining, and then maybe we'll do that and ask you to check, make sure we did our math correctly. To look at some of the scenarios, the layering of changes or not, as we address this. But I appreciate it. Let me ask just a qualitative question. The amortization timeline, we've had a couple conversations over the last couple of days, and at first I thought it just sounded like a trick to lower your expense, but now I'm sort of getting the sense that switching your amortization would not be viewed on extremely negatively, or would it be viewed on? I'm just trying to assess which of these might impact the way people look at our bonding and all the rest of the things that we do as in terms of being conservative.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and I don't believe that changing to any of these scenarios, whether it be 15, 17, or 20 years, would be looked at negatively. It's not like you're saying you're going to 30 years. I wouldn't even I would not recommend that, or even 25 years would be too much. Given the average age of your active members and the expected working lifetime you have for those members, these are reasonable amounts. And to see a refresh in the amortization period periodically is not atypical. It is a common
Okay.
practice.
That's good to know. So if I heard you right or heard your answer to Lisa's question correctly, we originally at one point had a 25-year amortization, and we are 12 years into it, so that there are 13 years left. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so halfway through to re-up to 20 would not be a material change in the way we look at sort of the future. Okay, all right. I appreciate that. I think I'm thinking differently about it than I was earlier today, so I appreciate that. Well, this has been very helpful. I thank you. We also, Amy was able to share with us the actual Milliman reports on each of the pension and OPEB plans, so not had a chance to really go through those in detail. But if, Amy, you can share with our board members these slides, it would be helpful for us to think about how we really want to, how far we want to go, when we want to do it, and how deep, on what timeline. I think it'd be very helpful. Jen, thank you so much. Any other questions for Jen? Appreciate this. And as Derek says, I am watching the clock. We've got a couple of other things to do. And so again, thank you very, very much, Jen, for sitting through our other presentation, if you did, and presenting to us.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
All right, thanks. Approval of minutes. There was one suggested change, which was made by Lisa to reference the topic of the executive session. And my only reaction was to ask if that was protocol or appropriate or inappropriate. To the extent it's okay to do so, I'm fine with the change. If there's any reason why you would not say why we went into executive session, then we should be careful about that. But to the extent that they routinely do, so just Amy, would you double check on that, what Tom and you and I talked about at the beginning? Okay.
I think actually we have to, by law, designate why we go into executive session. How
if that's the case. I really have no context, so I'm fine with the idea. All right. Sharon's shaking her head like she knows. Okay, great. Then let's make the change. And I'll be looking for a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Rob, there's all kinds of errors in them. If you want to go through, I'll just vote against it. But I mean, there are a whole bunch of things that just don't make any sense in here. They should be edited.
Okay. Let's defer approval of the minutes. Let's make the edits.
Okay, and I can give you countless examples, but I really don't understand a whole bunch of things in here.
So let me just say, I learned when I first came onto the board years ago that, and we also had a situation where we had a lot of errors, that the way they do this, whatever gets published as a draft, when we amend it a month later, it shows up in the next month's report. So if it says, the sky is red in May, in June, there'll be in the next set of minutes something that says, that the word red was changed to blue. Okay. But it won't go back and change the original report. So it's really, really hard for the public to understand anything. And so my suggestion is, if someone in the staff or somewhere can take a look at the draft that the clerk does and clean up errors of grammar and typos and stuff before it ever gets put out, that's the way to deal with it. Because otherwise it's impossible to ever understand what the hell went on.
Point well taken. Let me just, when we start off, we said there was clean and there were no findings. I don't know what that means. I mean, Mr. Pomeroy thanked town management, Ms. Meredith, her hard work and excellent rapport, R-E-P-O-U-R, with a rating agency. So, okay, let's just say we note there are a bunch of errors in it. Let's approve them. And to Linda's point, it's hard to both write them and edit them. And I suggest that,
Somebody needs to.
I agree.
somebody needs to edit these in the future. Otherwise, it's not making sense.
We've had, be careful. We've had various levels of quality of the output, and this was in need of some reread and editing. I agree.
Okay.
So let's approve them in their current format with a strong recommendation that they're attended to by town staff before they're presented as the minutes of our meetings.
Yes.
All right, so I need, so somebody move that.
I will move that.
Someone second it.
I'll second.
And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, and then we have the lighting upgrade loan agreement. Amy, you want to run us through this?
Actually, we have a guest tonight. Tom Roy will actually take you through it.
Ah,
Hi, Tom.
Hey, hi. How everybody? How are you?
Good.
I know you guys have had a long meeting, so I'll just try to go through this fairly quickly. But the Connecticut Energy Efficiency Fund, which we all pay for through every time we pay our electric bill, is set up funds so that all of us can save money. And in this term, the town was able to do effectively a $250,000 project with $126,000 in rebates. And now we have the ability to pay for that over 4 years at a 0% loan. During that first 4 years where we're paying back the loan, we're going to be saving about $10,000 a year. Once the loan is paid off, we're going to be saving about $40,000 a year.
Great.
The work was done at Simsbury Farms, the library, and at Town Hall.
sounds good.
Are there additional places where you can do this work,
Yeah.
Tom?
We actually had a meeting today with our vendor at the Performing Arts Center. The question
Excellent.
down there is going to be whether or not if the lights have enough run time that we would actually be able to see the same savings. But certainly we're looking at it. This is one of these things that, as many of you know me, I get very excited about the ability to save money by these type of programs where we end up with high quality lighting. We end up actually saving also on maintenance costs associated with all the new lighting that went in the building and no out-of-pocket expense for the town. So it's a really exciting program.
Great. So do we have a motion we need to make, Amy? Yes.
Yep, in your packet.
All right, so I need someone to move effective March 3rd, not 3rd, 9th, to authorize town manager Maria to execute agreements with Eversource for each of the 3 lighting upgrade projects as presented.
So moved.
Linda moved and Derek seconded. Is that what I heard?
Yeah,
Sure.
just question. I think we don't need to authorize Maria to sign the contract. That's done by the Board of Selectmen. Wouldn't we be authorizing the appropriation?
No, there's no appropriation. Actually, it was recommended by Bob that the Board of Finance authorize the signing of the contract as well because it is a loan.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm happy to do it. I'm not, okay, that's fine.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded. There's been some discussion. Any other questions or comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Passes. And I think that is it for tonight. All right. If you enjoy these meetings, you can watch the Board of Selectmen meeting tomorrow night, which I think will be equally entertaining. And then we get to do this all again next Tuesday.
Great.
Hey, you guys.
See you then.
I thank
All
you.
right.
All right, guys.